The infinite plane is about letting go. It's a physical place, but also a psychological one. Steve was a dualist. He believed that we had both a brain and a mind. He believed that there was the physical world and then there was consciousness, and that they were interlinked, but they were different. He'd given up on religion, but he had retained the notion that we would survive death because of this dichotomy. The infinite plane is nothing magical. It doesn't allow one to psychically communicate with the dead, although that might be kind of nice if Steve was right. It is an adventure that occurred on a frozen lake bed where the temperature was minus 12 Fahrenheit with a wind chill factor. Steve and I had taken a very large dose of LSD about 9:30 a.m. and we're planning to head out to the lake bed at 11. Karen was going to take us. We realized when 20 minutes after we took it, we experienced some rather profound effects, that this was going to be a very high-dose experience. Now, I gotta tell you what it looked like when we got there. First of all, it was a Sunday. It was extremely cold and windy, and it was snowing. All the trees were dead, and there's this huge lake bed, which is completely white, covered with snow, blowing through the air, blowing on the ice. The edges of the lake are covered with snow, and there are no sounds of people, of cars, of anything at all in the background. All there is wind and snow and us when Karen dropped us off. At first, I saw that Steve was very concerned. We'd both realized that this was a very large dose, and Karen was to pick us up in an hour and a half, and so Steve was concerned that we might miss her. And that wasn't my concern, but he said we should both set our watches with alarms so we wouldn't miss her. And when I was looking at his concern, I realized his concern was not only about the fact we're taking LSD and we might miss it, but I saw his connection to Karen. Now, I had been spending the past 3 days there watching Karen and Steve interact. And remember, I'm coming right off this bad shit with Alex, and I'm really mad at her, and that's a screwed up relationship. And I'm not really making this connection yet, but all that ties in with what happens next. So suddenly I see Steve as this kite. He's kind of thin and tall, and all of a sudden he was up in the air as a kite, and there's like a string holding him down, and it's Karen. And of course, psychologically, that made terrible sense. That makes sense. That's what it is. It's just a picture. It's something in my mind that came out. And then it turned to me, and I saw myself as solid. Here I was. I'd wanted Alex to come with me. I was alone. I was taking this massive dose of acid. I wasn't really concerned about, Karen showing up or us getting her on time. I would just look at my watch. I'd done that before, and I felt strong, solid. And then it all changed really fast like that. Because all of a sudden, I started to see that what happened with Steve and Karen, their marriage worked. That was a good relationship. And I started to think, I was so pissed at Alex, and I started feeling mad at myself. Because she was just a kid. She was 21 at this point, but just a kid, and she was screwed in the head, and I knew it, and that excited me because she was crazy, and I thought, God damn it, why do you always get into the wrong relationships? Why do you always fucking do that? And I got really down on myself in my head. Now, when you're tripping, you can't talk a lot. Not when we were already going pretty heavy by this time, 11:30, whatever. And so I feel like I'm getting dragged down by this vortex into a black hole. And I did what I always do. It's worked for me every single time on acid, on shrooms, but acid's, that's strong stuff. is I just would meditate and let the ideas float out of my head. Only this time it wasn't working, and I was getting sucked down deeper and deeper into this black hole, seeing that I was actually jealous of Steve. I was fucked up. Everything was all screwed up with Alex. We were going to break up. We hadn't officially done it, but that was fucking obvious, and all of it sucked. And it was all blown out of huge proportion because that's what acid does. And I didn't know how to get out of it. And then, and it wasn't my idea, something happened. What happened was the wind was blowing on me. The snow was coming off of me, blowing around me, and I felt that wind. I was facing that wind. And suddenly I became transparent to it. And in the next instant, I felt the back of my head blow out, and I felt myself falling backwards. I closed my eyes. I didn't literally fall backwards. I tilted my head backwards. And when I opened my eyes, I saw the infinite plane. I saw and felt something remarkable. Sure, it came from my physical environment. What there was just white, a plane of white, infinite, scaleless. Even when you looked on the horizon, there was no trees. It was just white. The sky was white. The snow, the sides of the lake were white. It was just all the same. And I felt myself spreading out like some oil onto water, just spreading out until I was spread to infinity and I was gone. So the infinite plane was taken as material is taken in your dreams from what was there. The particulars for how I got there aren't important. I was out of this cyclone that was heading into a black hole. And for some time, I was without myself. I was egoless, which is not that uncommon if you take a high dose. But what's important to me is that place exists. And I return to that place when I meditate. It's a place that's very important to me. Now, certainly there was a dramatic feeling associated with that, so it's been imprinted in my emotional memory, and it makes it easier for me to return there. And perhaps it makes me feel that that state of consciousness is more important than perhaps it is. Now, to tell you where this leads. While on the ice, Steve and I had a very brief conversation. Steve said, "When you die, you die." And I said, "Yup." And we never discussed that, ever. Steve was alive for 4 more years, and I never told him about the infinite plane. And that's not too uncommon. There's a lot of stuff that comes up. But in 4 years, Steve graduated from med school. Alex and I were back together. She was then a practicing attorney. And things were really good. In fact, we went for a 2-week vacation up to Colorado and had a wonderful time. And during that time, we went to Steve's graduation ceremony. Steve, Karen, and many friends of Steve also talked to Steve about death. And Steve talked to me about death. Because we all realized what a danger it was for Steve to become a doctor. And there, if I choose, is where the rest of the story goes. But it's hard to let go.